Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is Wednesday, June 10th, 2020, and welcome to episode, I believe it's 80, of Gearbox. We're not going to really be talking about gear today, but I am looking forward to having a conversation and a bit of a chat about looking forward, where we go from here. And hold on. I thought I muted that. I'm just going to bring up the YouTube page to make sure everything is working correctly. And if you are here watching and you can give me a confirmation on picture and sound that it is clear on both sides of the equation, more importantly with the sound, but let's make sure the picture is okay as well, then that would be awesome. This is not a rehearsed episode, and this is not an episode that I have an outline for. It's really just some thoughts in terms of what has happened in the last 3 months and where we look at things going forward. Afternoon, Reach Films, Shiz. Hope you're both doing well, and if you could just give me a thumbs up or an okay on picture and sound, that would be great. Rich just gave me that, so we are good. Gerald's in. Derek, here we are. Sound okay. Hello, good. So we've got confirmation. Perfect. All right. So here we are. We are, for most of us, about 3 months into all of this stuff. And this channel isn't about politics. It's not about science. It's not about religion. It's about video production. It's about filmmaking. It's about craft. It's about tech. It's about us and what we are and will be doing when it comes to production. A little bit of post, but mainly production to post workflows. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. There's some great stuff here, I think, that can help you in terms of conversations, education, and things related to this industry. It's kind of the no fluff channel, I would say. We just kind of get down to business, nuts and bolts, and if that suits you, then maybe hang out for a little while. So I do want this to be interactive. I definitely want anybody who's here watching this live to interact. But just sort of putting things into context, and this may be somewhat cerebral, more from the brain than the heart. It might not be. We'll sort of see how it all goes. I think the heart always comes into this, and instincts and everything else. But like many people, hey David, I was blindsided by what happened 3 months ago. And like many of you and people who do this for a living, pretty much all of my work disappeared in a very, very short period of time. I was fortunate to keep one job, which helped me very temporarily stay afloat for a short period of time, and then I got really scared. And everybody's situation is different. Some people are living alone. Some people have roommates. Some people have a partner. Some people have a spouse and they have children. There's lots of different situations out there. I have a family of 5, and so it wasn't since 2008 that was the last time that I got really scared about where things were going. And this was, I think, a lot scarier than that because the picture was much clearer when we had the real estate bust in 2008 going into 2009. It was more predictable. It was scary because of the lack of work, but there were less unknowns. You know, we're getting so much information every day in terms of where this is going, where it's not going, a lot of conflicting information of what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and also as an industry, very little in the way until recently as far as what the guidelines are going to be to get back to work. And I need to acknowledge for myself and for most people out there that those guidelines don't even pertain to us in actual fact, because those guidelines relate to an industry that we're in, but we're not necessarily working in that capacity. And what do I mean by that? I mean episodic television. I mean feature films. I mean larger productions. The mid to the large size productions are the ones that are going to, from day one, have to follow these guidelines. And it includes, yes, things like you can't have a buffet line, you're going to have staggered call times, but also having a COVID-19 specialist or something like that. So I don't really know what that means for me as an independent producer and director. What's up, Bart? What's up? Shiz says, aviation professional, so hit as well. Now I gotta venture to find a side gig. Yeah, I have no credentials regarding video production. Most of us don't. And not sure how I'd break into it now. Well, let's have a conversation about that, Shiz, in a few minutes, because there's some things that I've been working on in the last few months, which I think are areas of opportunity for people. But yes, so Blindsided, we're getting guidelines in terms of what to do. FlexoTube, who I know is pretty much 100% back, but in your situation, you're working for a company, so you basically had to stay at home, and then you did some education, you kind of prep for stuff, and now you're being rescheduled. I think production in the corporate world is happening, and I think if you're in-house production, then that's going to be a very different environment than if you're working on commercials, episodic television, feature films. That's going to be very different. And yes, it is going to take longer, and it's going to cost more, and it's going to be different. But internally, for in-house production, that may be the fastest back to normal type of production that's going to exist. Because internally and legally, the company can set guidelines and have agreements with their employees in the way they're going to work, and they should be working safely. But they can do it in probably in a faster capacity. And then with the feature film industry, it's just going to cost a lot more. Productions are going to take longer, and the same for commercials and things like that. But they'll be willing to spend that money, and the clients will be willing to spend that money to create that content, because that content needs to exist. We've all been binging and watching a lot of content on Amazon Prime and on Disney Plus and on Netflix, and that content has to, all of those productions that were halted have to get back into production. And there's only so many at-home commercials we can probably watch in these times and all of that kind of stuff. So the toughest part, I think, of the industry, not that the other parts are not tough, is going to be self-employed, independent people who are tasked with working with small to medium-sized companies who are put into the producer role, and they have to figure out how to do production for clients and make the clients feel safe, make sure that they're legally protected. And I think right now there are no real guidelines when it comes to that. So it's a case-by-case basis. It has to do with the client and you as independent, either contractor. I'm really talking about being a producer and how you go about doing business. And I don't have the answers to all of that. I just want to acknowledge that as we look ahead and we move forward, that those are challenges that we're going to have, and those challenges are going to exist, and they're going to be different depending on the clients that we're working for. So what does that mean? Well, it means I'm still scared. I'm still in an unknown. I've been relatively productive during this time, and I've worked, this is getting to what you were talking about, Shiz. I've been working towards learning new skills that I think are interesting to me. That's the most important if you are going to go forward with doing work in a particular area, and B, are skills that I think are going to be needed by clients going forward. And so a lot of what I've been focusing on is learning about this. I've been learning about how to live stream more effectively, how to produce virtual events, how to put all of those pieces together. I've even had to learn something about OBS recently, even though I love Ecamm Live as a platform on the Mac for doing live streaming. Yeah, it's been a big learning experience. And I think that those skills are things that are starting to produce interest and potential, actually some very, very little income related to my knowledge base in that area. And I think that if you want to learn more about that, first and foremost, you should be looking for Alex Lindsay's Office Hours, which happens 7 days a week and is an incredible resource in terms of conversations related to this type of stuff, live event production, virtual events, related to live streaming and all of this type of technology, along with general discussions about audio and cameras and post-production workflows and things like that. So it's a great resource. I've been part of it in terms of in terms of being a panel and also learning so much from there. It's been great. David says, invest in nice and comfortable masks. It makes a huge difference. It absolutely does. And hit or miss on return to productions, doing a bi-weekly, this is from Phil, live stream for a band who had their concerts canceled and a few smaller gigs. Most of my clients don't care about wearing PPE. Yeah, so, it's really all over the place. And a lot of this has to do with personal opinions. Some of it may have to do with geographical location and potential risk in that location. There's so many things. Again, it's not this channel to discuss the science and the politics and all of those things that relate to all of this stuff. It's a mess here in the U.S. at least, but really, like for instance, on Sunday, what I did is I trekked out to a local winery, and they had a virtual event that I helped them produce. So what we did is we set up the A10 Mini. We had an Xt4 and an Xt4. My laptop, I brought my Wi-Fi hotspot because when I went to do a scout, I knew the space, but we wanted to do tests on equipment. We found that their internet was not fast enough. I brought my Wi-Fi hotspot, and the way I've kind of rigged that to force it to be on a particular band, and we were getting better bandwidth. In the end, it was kind of iffy for the live stream. It was 2 hours long, but it actually worked. And we had some issues, but overall, it was a good first try. And I think that there are going to be clients who are going to need that. In fact, in the state of Oregon, we have now with phase 2 the ability to have gatherings up to, I believe, 100 people in most counties in the state, and that's outside. Obviously, you're supposed to be distancing, and that means that you could, in theory, have a small concert or event with a small live audience, and then you could do a virtual event where you are streaming that to people. So I think that there are companies not only for performance, but just sort of getting branding and messaging out, also interacting with customers that are going to need those types of services in terms of video production. That could be an area, Shiz, that you could look at. And I think that it has to do with really doing your homework. Just like anything in this industry, you've got to learn the tech side of what is needed to do this consistently well. And what I'm learning pretty quickly is that one person is generally not enough to pull it off effectively. And I learned that lesson really on Sunday because there's just too many moving parts. It's just like any other production. You've got multiple cameras, potentially. You've got a switcher now in the equation. You are monitoring your connection and potentially making changes to that with what you're pushing, in our case, to YouTube, but wherever you were pushing that content. And I think that overall, there are lots of possibilities in terms of what you can offer. It's just really doing that kind of stuff. Yes, there was a big firmware update to the A10 Mini, which is going to be great, because we're going to be able to handle some of those latency issues if we don't want to plug our mics directly into camera. Sorry for the aside. It wasn't non sequitur, but just acknowledging that comment from Phil. And Shiz is saying, yes, that's why I went and jumped on the A10 Mini Pro once it got announced. Maybe I can provide some live services to companies or people who want to live stream and don't have the know-how. Yes, I agree. A10 Mini Pro might be a better choice because you also have the ability to record that. Of course, you could take your HDMI out and record that. There's a lot of ways you can record your stream, but if you want quality, then you're going to have to look at those options. But more importantly for me, educationally, was learning about the connectivity issues related to live streaming. And I'm still trying to work it out, especially in a more rural area. But if you don't have the right and consistent upload speed, at least 10 megabits per second, but hopefully 15 to 20 minimum, then you're going to have a lot of issues when it comes to live streaming for your clients. And that's where things are going to fall apart. So I think you really have to start to think about that. The difference between the A10 Mini and A10 Mini Pro are very little and very significant depending on what you're trying to do. As you scale your team to service clients and you're doing live streaming, the Pro is a much better choice because you get a 4-up output of what your inputs are, so that when you are going to switch, then you have a very good idea of what that's going to be. And then I have some tests to do. I don't know if there are enough ports out of the thing to do it based on the way I have it set up. I'm going to need to get a different hub, I think. But IP address from the A10 Mini or A10 Mini Pro, and then using something like Strata to be able to switch. Because one of my challenges as an educator will be, or even in the situation that I was doing the other day, is I constantly had to walk over to the A10 to switch from the camera angles that I had. If I had an iPhone solution for me to be able to switch, Strata should be able to do that based on the videos I'm watching. Then what I can do is I can switch my cameras based on and react to what's happening at the event. So as long as I'm in the room, I can essentially call and switch the show myself, and that show that's going out live. So what I can effectively do is react, and especially when it comes to music or performance, you're trying to switch to different camera angles based on and reacting to what's happening. If you're not familiar with a band or their songs and you have 3 or 4 cameras and something happens, for instance, somebody has a guitar solo, then you want to be able to cut to a camera that's going to focus on that. But if you are behind the cameras and you have to walk over to a switcher and you have issues in terms of where you can place that, that can become a challenge. And those are the types of things beyond connectivity and bandwidth that you have to actually think about. Yeah, or you can become a YouTube personality and watch the millions of people coming in. So yeah, office hours is amazing. It really is an amazing resource. If you don't know anything about this area, it is definitely a place to go. And even if you do, I think there's some really great minds there. So let's see. I'm still waiting for my A10 Mini. So is everybody. It's been 2+ months. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What else we got? Any other questions or things that we should start talking about? I want to talk about other stuff. Also, a lot of talk about live training within our organization. Having an A10 Mini Pro in your kit is probably going to be the new norm. I agree. I mean, for me, the ultimate goal is going to be to build out the studio space in the barn. And the A10 Mini Pro is going to be kind of the key to the castle for a lot of the content that I want to create. Shiz kind of mentioned this earlier on, which is the editing part of it. And if you can get it right and you can do a little bit of a rehearsal or have an outline, then there is the opportunity to be able to create live content if it's planned out well. And then that content goes out. You also have the added benefit of interacting with and having dialogue with the people who are watching that content, whether that's free or paid content. So I do think that when you're going to do that, you obviously are going to have your presenter or the person who's going to provide the educational content or people that are going to provide that content. And then you really have to think about who that small production team is going to be. It's impossible to do that effectively in education unless it's maybe in a small space like this and it's very confined in terms of the topics that you're covering without having a minimum crew. Sure, you could dial in your audio in a known space and you could use wired or wireless mics to provide that. Generally for education it's going to be wireless, so you have the ability to move around in the space. And then dial in your lighting and everything. But I think you're going to need at minimum 2, ideally 3 people on your crew to be able to handle that. Because what you have to do first and foremost is you have to have people who, or a person who is dealing with camera. And even if you have a locked off A camera, and then you have other cameras that are semi-locked off, you're going to probably want to react with at least 1 or 2 of those cameras in terms of what's going on in the space. So somebody sort of camera operator, DP person. And then I think you're going to need somebody on that switcher. And that person on the switcher can't necessarily be the person that's dealing with and lobbing out questions related to, the content that's being created. So there's a dance there in terms of how that has to be done. For my band, we are doing 7 cameras, 3 operators, A10 Mini Pro with an original A10 Mini feeding into channel 4 on the Pro. Crazy setup, but it works. Yeah, that makes sense. You're doing an A10 into an A10 Mini Pro and A10 Mini into an A10 Mini Pro, which is essentially an Inception, which is okay with me. No shoots in the last 3+ months had made me realize how tough being a one-man band has had on my nearly 50-year body. Rethinking, I'm with you on that, Sam. Either reducing amount, weight of gear, or pivoting to post only. Interesting. Yeah, so post for me, Sam, isn't the area that I really want to focus on. I really want to focus on production and production to post, but I totally get that. I actually had a career in post-production for a long time and moved away from it because I was finding that it was having a similar effect on my body but in a different way. And I was generally a sitting editor, a sitting motion graphics person, a sitting DVD author, and that just wreaked havoc on me. And, I have the posture of an 80-year-old man now. But it's, it's an issue, and it's definitely something to consider. Or with OBS getting to additional USB streams. Yeah, there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of things to look at in terms of the gear. But I will say that while it seems overwhelming, and it seems like there are so many... Sorry about the dog, if you can hear that, which you probably can. If it seems overwhelming, there are actually some things that are very focused in terms of the type of equipment. We're talking about the A10 Mini, the A10 Mini Pro, and that kind of stuff. And it's it's tools like that are sort of the basis of what you're going to do. And then you have to start to think about other parts of the equation. When you have clients who move away from using traditional webcams that are built into their tablets, their smartphones, their laptop computers, or even if they have a little Logitech one that they're putting onto their computer, and then you start to move to mirrorless cameras and you start to move to DSLRs as your quote-unquote webcams, which they are, but they have larger sensors and give you shallower depth of field and other features. You then have to think about this. You have to think about the interactivity with your audience and how that works, and eye lines and being able to connect with people when you're doing Zoom meetings, when you're doing consulting over Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting and Blue Jeans and all of these other options, or you're just doing a Skype call or whatever it's going to be. Because no longer is it your iPad that's over there, and so that's the deal. Where's my infomercial mic? What does that mean, David? I want to know what that means. My infomercial mic. You're gonna have to explain that. So there's a lot of things to consider, but the tools are relatively limited in terms of the setup, right? You need a computer system. You need generally a computer system that can take USB-C inputs now if you're going to be using the A10 Mini, A10 Mini Pro. There are ways to change that. I don't know what's going on here. I've got to text somebody. It is, it's killing the live stream here. So I'll just do a very, very quick one here. So, and then here we go. Here we go. Live streaming. And get the dog out of there. How loud is the dog? Tell me. I want to know. Yeah. So there we go. And now I hear people running. So the infomercial mic. Sorry, I'm going back to airplane mode. It got a little quiet again. Things have happened. The power of texting. This is the HS2, and this is what I use with the Wireless Go. And it's a great solution, especially when I want to be able to move around in a space. But right now I'm on a 35mm lens, and I just have the VideoMic NTG right here out of frame, and that's what I'm using for my audio. So barely audible on the dog. That's good to know. I'm pretty close proximity. I'm going to say 9 inches away from this mic, and it's relatively directional, so that's probably helping. So there you go. But there were lots of exclamation points in my text to see if we could, another challenge of working from home in these times. So computer system, USB-C inputs, A10 Mini, A10 Mini Pro, and then you're going to need obviously audio solutions, which we just started to talk about. And those are things that really are kind of the core things that you need beyond your camera systems and how many cameras you're going to have. And then in addition to that, if you're going to do this, then you generally want to have some sort of teleprompter solution so that you can have connection with your audience, you can have the right eye lines. And even when we're doing things like our weekly live stream on this day at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, Camera and Flask with Caleb and Ben, I'm using this so that I can have conversations with them and react, and it just feels a lot more personal. And you get that if you're using a cheap webcam out of your laptop computer because you're looking right at your computer. The eye line is a little strange because it's generally right at the top and then you're looking down at the screen, but it's usually generally good enough for that. Okay, just got a VideoMic NTG in today. It sounds great. Stream looks really good too. Great, that's awesome. I don't know if you mean yours sounds great, but I'm assuming. But if you're referring to mine, that's great. Am I still enjoying the Xt4? I'm looking at picking one up. What are your favorite lenses to use on it currently? Hey, why not? We'll have a conversation about that. And I do want to talk about just sort of our responsibility as a community when it comes to rates and things like that as a follow-up to this. But just to sort of recap, this is doable. You can learn this. In fact, I'm going to do some courses related to remote studio setups and how this is all set up, and I'm going to start production on that probably in the next 7 to 10 days in this space. And then, Ryan, I'm actually going to start to create more Xt4 content as well that will be available. And so I'm going to talk about the Xt4 in a second. So the thing is, there's a lot of unknowns right now. I think our responsibility is first and foremost to listen to our clients and our potential clients. We need to read them. It's still about instincts. It's about safety. If you're hiring crew, you may have to look at your contractor agreements with them and put some language into that agreement that we're going to see also when we're being hired in other positions, which protects the company from the potential situations when it relates to contracting a virus. And it may have to be broader than COVID-19, though this is obviously what everybody has their attention on right now. It's a really weird thing because you're going to have to do something like that. If you're going to hire somebody, you're hiring them, and you're probably going to have to put something into your contract or your agreement with them that you're not ultimately responsible for whether or not they contract an illness. And this is not something that hasn't existed in agreements in, again, higher end production, but now it's front and center in terms of people's attention on this. And you have to be aware of the fact that when we're talking about liability, it's a very real thing that we have to acknowledge and have, yes, responsibility for our crew, but also know that each one of us as individuals are going to make our own choices in terms of who we interact with, especially as we start to open up and we go into these different phases, and our exposure. And even on its most base level, you have to go to the grocery store, and you have no idea where the other people in the grocery store have been. You don't know where they have traveled to and from. And some will be wearing masks, some will not be wearing masks, and we get a lot of conflicting information on the pluses and the minuses of that as well. And so people, especially in the United States, are going to be of very different minds depending on where you are and who they are as individuals. And so it's going to be a challenge because you really can't be responsible for the decisions that other people make. What you can do is you can put best practices into a set or a production that are, and I think it's going to be much tougher in a state like California, possibly in New York, than it is in other states. But you're going to have to put best practices in so everybody gets individual meals. Everybody gets knives and forks that are, wrapped. You're obviously going to have disinfecting wipes and hand sanitizer, and you're going to have some level of PPE available on your productions. And you're going to have some agreements in place between you and your clients and your contractors in terms of how all of that works. And I think it's going to be an evolution in terms of things. I'm hoping that we have more concrete guidelines, but that they're not so strict that they prevent us from actually doing work. Because ultimately, this is a horrible, horrible situation that is occurring right now, but there will be greater or lesser risks to contracting a virus depending on where you are geographically, types of exposure, and all of those things. Again, we're not talking science here. We're not talking about what's right or wrong. We're just talking about the fact that there are variables that exist when it comes to things like this. And there are things that I think about as a producer. The other thing is that we have to, and I'm getting to you, Ryan, we have to protect our industry as a whole when it comes to going back to work. And that's just not from a health standpoint, that is from a financial standpoint. And so it's going to be very easy, and I've spoken about this before, Small Brown Fox is going to get smashed on CNF tonight. You have to tell me why. I would like to know that. It's our responsibility to make sure that as we move forward in production, that just because most of us haven't worked in a long time, we can't just, especially with clients, slash rates to ridiculously low levels just to be able to work again, even though we really are dying to work. Because if we do that, we change our potential for survival. Our rents aren't going down, our mortgages aren't getting less, unless you're making a huge life change because of the situation. So our day-to-day costs are not going down, plus many of us are accumulating debt during this period of time. So if you take your 600-day rate or your 500-day rate and you drop it to 300 to 400 for work that you're doing just to get work, then it's going to be a problem. Good. Bart's coming to CNF tonight. I'm super excited. Hulk smash, love it. I don't know what that means, but I guess. Shiz is making a comment towards Small Brown Fox, And yeah, Ryan, it's not about not being responsible. I always take the viewpoint as a producer that I'm responsible for my crew, and I have production insurance, I have liability insurance. I have the core things that I need, but I may have to look at other things when it relates to doing production, especially in certain places. I'm not attracted to doing production in California right now because I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to do it. It's already hard when you're hiring contractors and you essentially have to put every contractor on payroll. That means that you have additional costs for the payroll service, and then on top of that, which I've now put in, I have a payroll service. On top of that, we also generally, depending state by state, you may have to have workers' comp embedded into that production. So you're effectively treating your independent contractor like an employee. So for me, it's going to be a lot more attractive for me to hire people who have their own companies as opposed to just being a traditional independent contractor. So if I know that you have a company and I can pay you as a company, I still will have an agreement with you about the work that you're doing, but it takes, I believe, some of those issues that we have to deal with in order to be able to produce content cost effectively, but at correct rates. And so it's really there's so much stuff that comes about with all of these things that you are going to have to make adjustments. But for me, Ryan, it's more about acknowledging that you can't be fully responsible for whether or not somebody gets sick because you don't know all of their circumstances and who they've been exposed to. So you try to do everything you can to create a safe set, make sure the people who are coming onto that set are healthy. I think as producers, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have backup plans, which are very hard in production because generally I'm doing soft holds for crews, and then I want to know from a client at least 2 weeks ahead of time whether or not the production is going ahead. That's fine. I can still do that. But what happens if I get a call 2 days before a production and somebody says, I have a fever and I have a sore throat, and they're your DP? So how do you handle that? And in some ways, this is going to sound a little crazy, as somebody who does production, it's going to be even more important for you to understand and to actually be able to do some of the jobs that you may not have known how to do in the past. You always want to hire people who are better than you at what they do, but you may need to have skill sets so that if you lose a crew member, and obviously you don't want to bring anybody on to the production, the set, the location who has any symptoms of anything, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's COVID-19. It could be just influenza, the flu. It could be something else, but anything, any type of virus that may exist, you don't want them there. So you have to look at alternates to being able to move that production forward. So I think it's very important for us to start thinking about all of those things. We want to protect our rates, we want to take care of our crew, and we want to make sure that we are thinking ahead in terms of contingency plans for when things do go wrong. That is 90% of what we do when it comes to our job anyway. It's the planning, it's the pre-production, it's handling the things that could come up before they come up so that you can then, at that point, be able to deal with the things that will come up. There's always things that are going to come up. I don't know what's going on in the chat here. It's amusing, though, so I'll let that kind of keep going. So back to the Fujifilm Xt4, which is actually the camera I'm using right now for this live stream, and the answer is, without question, I really like the camera. It's, as with every camera system that exists out in the world, not a perfect camera. It has great but not always reliable autofocus, which is one thing that I'm looking for this type of production. but it's very good, but it's very good once you hit record, and it's not as reliable when you're not hitting record, and this just seems to be an Xt3, Xt4 thing. Incredibly happy with the overall picture quality that I get out of the camera. Love film simulations because they're very reliable and quick ways to get in-camera looks with the camera. But of course, you can shoot f-log, and then you can apply LUTs in post-production or just correct the image yourself in terms of a color correction, but also grading. So that really has to do with what you're doing. It's getting ugly here in the chat. I don't know. Here we go. Yeah, all right. Now it's getting a little weird. Now it's definitely getting weird. Jeez. So back to cameras. Xt4, very happy. I'm going to talk a little bit about lenses because that was also the second part of that question, and give you sort of my take on what I think. So first and foremost, there are quite a few zoom lenses that exist for the XT series. We've got the 18 to 55 kit lens, which is an f2.8 to an f4. We have the 16 to 80, which is an f4 all the way through. And I was not blessing you there. I'm just showing the range. And then there is the 16 to 55 f2.8. Well, those are the three that I think we should probably discuss in terms of lenses. And the first thing you need to know, and you can check out the 16 to 80 little video I did on my channel, is that when it comes to changing focal length using the Fujifilm zooms as they are right now, unless you're using the MKX lenses, that's the 18 to 55 and the 50 to 135, Rockstar lenses, $1,000 off right now, at least as far as I know still at B&H. They're expensive. They're $3,000 each. They breathe almost not at all. They're T2.9 through the range, and I'm sorry I'm kind of diverting there, but they do make them in E mount, they make them in Micro Four Thirds mount, I believe, and they definitely make them in X mount. Those lenses, which I have, I actually have right now, but I'm going to be sending them back to Fujifilm, are exceptional. I absolutely love them, but there's no autofocus capabilities. They're geared identical on both lenses. They have very similar weight. They're exactly the same size, and so I think that if you're looking at the Xt4 for sort of mid to high-end production, then you should be considering those Fujifilm zooms if you're just cranking content in lots of different, areas. And they're perfect. I mean, that is a really, sure, I wish the wide was a 16, not an 18, but the 18 to 55, 50 to 135, you can rockstar your productions with that as long as you're fine pulling your own focus and you're dealing with that yourself. With focus assist tools, magnification, it's absolutely doable, and I think that those lenses are great combos. So now we get back to the other zooms. When you start zooming through the range, you start to see this weird steppiness that occurs. It also looks like exposure changes. So really what you have to do is that's correct. They are parfocal, almost no breathing. Parfocal means when you zoom all the way in and you get tack sharp focus, as you zoom out and back in, it's going to hold focus as long as you don't change your position. That's basically the way to define that. So you have to understand the steppiness of those 18 to 55, 16 to 80, 16 to 55 lenses. Obviously, the 16 to 55 is optically probably the best of the three. Plus, you get an f2.8 all the way through, but you don't get that extra reach that you get on the 16 to 80. 18 to 55 is an amazing kit lens, though you kind of have to set that lens to an f4 if you want the exposure to stay the same through that range. But you really have to treat all of the zoom lenses from Fujifilm at this point, unless they fix that steppiness with the change of focal range, as variable primes. So they're fine. You're doing an interview and you start the interview at the 24, and then you start to go in and you want to do the next question or a few questions into the 35. And then it gets a little more intimate, and the person's talking about some stuff, and they're going down the rabbit hole, and you go to a 55. But you have to make those changes in focal length in between the questions. You're probably not going to use those 3 lenses for an in-camera zoom that you're going to see as part of the shot. That's where it's really going to fall apart. So that's what you need to know about those. 16 to 55 also does not have any image stabilization, but you do have IBIS on the Xt4, so that's less of a consideration now, though IBIS has its own problems, so that's kind of the deal. Okay, so then we get into prime lenses. And last week's episode, I talked about using specialty lenses, and you could check that out. I talk about using the 9mm Laowa 0D lens, reticular. It doesn't really distort. There's no barrel distortion on the edges. That's a great specialty lens. Also showed the 50mm Sirui anamorphic, the 1.33x anamorphic. And those are, again, specialty lenses, but when you're looking at Fujifilm's line, if I were using them for video right now and I'm looking at primes, not for stills is a different conversation, but for video, I would very seriously be looking at the 23, 35, and 50mm weather-resistant lenses. They're all f2. They're all great little lenses, and coupled with the Xt4, you have a weather-resistant camera body and lenses. They also make a 16mm, which I like very, very much, and the 90mm, which is a much bigger lens, but is a beautiful lens. You have a lot of very interesting options in the stills area. And, that's the deal. So, but yes, Shiz, I understand your comments, and there are some gotchas to the system. But, I think that, Craig, I think you're thinking of the 50 to 135 if you're thinking about the MKX, or are you thinking about a different zoom lens that they have that's a still lens that has that range? Maybe I'm not familiar with that one. But Shiz, on the IS, I mean, you do have IBIS on the Xt4, but they don't have the headphone jack. I'm looking at some of the comments in the camera body unless you use USB-C, which actually does work, and they have an adapter that comes with the camera. The problem is that I'm generally using that USB-C port to power the camera, and I've done splitters and they don't work, and I haven't found one that actually works. I've seen the same problems, Ryan, with IBIS that I see with other cameras, which is IBIS is not smart enough to understand camera movement, so you have to move your camera a certain way, because if you move your camera too quickly, then you'll see a jerkiness in the IBIS movement. It's definitely a great IBIS implementation, but you have to, just across the boards, be aware of what IBIS looks like. And I think it can work really, really well if you're moving the camera a certain way. You just need to know the gotchas of it, especially when you're on long focal lengths. I mean, it can really be very apparent if you start to make a change with your body movement in terms of panning or tilting or both, then it can sort of all of a sudden come in and the IBIS kicks in and you see this little jerk of a movement, and that does make it less likely for you to use that part of the shot. To me, it's distracting. But there's also, if you can kind of get into the rocking the baby kind of feeling, which is a way that I like to shoot, then you see that problem far less in terms of stuff. I generally set my tracking as low as possible. It depends on what I'm shooting, but I like tracking sensitivity to be relatively low because I don't want it to latch onto things too quickly. And AF speed is generally low as well. But I tweak it based on the situation and what I'm doing. So that's an answer to that, Small Brown Fox. And let's see what else we've got. Agree, MFT stuff being incredible. Yep. I also use the 23 f2 using AF. Yeah, I'm using the 35 right now. The one that I use most of the time here in this space is the 23. I've decided I own the 35, I own the 56-1.2. I've decided a million percent I'm buying the 23, and I'm very seriously considering getting the 16 because I've had the opportunity, luckily, for the content I've been creating and doing stuff with Fujifilm to be able to test all of these lenses. And it's a win-win because I get to give you feedback on them. But I would just say, if you're looking for the starter set, then I would do 23, 35, 50 in the f2 lenses. And then you really have to make a decision in terms of that zoom lens as far as what you need. Do you need that extra stop? Then the 16 to 55 f2.8 may be the way to go. Do you need the extra reach? The 16 to 80 may be the way to go. And the 16 to 80 is not a lot more expensive right now as a kit lens than the 18 to 55. And again, 18 to 55, rock star of a lens, really like it. Optical image stabilization. It is actually slightly faster right on the wide end of the 2.8, so you do get a slightly shallower depth of field and a little more light coming in at that wide angle. But again, you don't get that reach that you get on the 80. And for me, if you're ending at 50 on your primes, the 16 to 80 at an f4 gives you in an interview setting, that longer reach that you may want to go for. I'd rather shoot an interview at a 2.8. But, these are the challenges that we have. A 55 in the right position between you and talent on an APS-C sensor camera is going to give you a very nice shallow depth of field and a nice frame as long as your position to talent is where it should be. So 16 to 55, also a rock star, and again, optically probably the best. A lot of people saying that the R5 is going to be a new standard. I'm waiting until we see what happens with final specs having to do with data rates and what the log options are going to be. I'm guessing there's going to be things, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing there are going to be some things about the camera, as is always true, that are going to bug the S out of us. And yeah, Jem will have to give whiskey if the R5 is under $4,000. Yes, that is true. And Caleb and I are sort of in if it does come in at less than 4. And if it comes in at less than 4, then it should be amazing. Ryan's leaning towards the 16 to 55. Okay, yeah, I'm not telling you to buy that lens, but I would say that optically, as long as you don't need that extra reach, and you do have IBIS on the Xt4, the 16 to 55 is their best affordable zoom. That's like kind of an all-arounder. And because it's a 2.8 across the boards, you might start with that and use it as a variable prime. I do feel that there are going to be times where you're going to want to lean onto a prime lens and maybe have that extra stop in that f2. So, why don't you get the if you get the 16 to 55, Ryan, you should start to do some tests and find out where you're sitting with that camera most often in terms of your favorite focal lengths when you're using it as a variable prime lens. And then that will help inform your decisions in terms of what focal lengths you might start with when you buy primes for that camera. And, there you go. And what are we talking about for rolling shutter? Are you saying that the guesses on the R5? And what's the 30-second recording limit? You mean 30-minute? You'll have to let me know what you mean. Rolling shutter is very good on the Xt4, so that's not weird. It's not like when the A6300, one of them came out, and I bought it, and I opened it up, I turned it on, put it into UHD 4K, and I started to move the camera around, and within 10 minutes I had packed it up and sent it back. It was so bad. Ryan, there you go. So there's your conversation about that, and we'll see what happens about I think the rolling shutter is going to be good on the R5. I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem. There's other things we're going to have to see. 30-second record time would be pretty funny. We'll see how it all works out, and we should know pretty soon. So this became kind of like a slightly different episode, but I think that's kind of what Gearbox is all about. I have a topic at hand, and then it's always an open forum for questions, and Ryan kind of opened up with the Xt4. So I think, that was good to get into that. And I probably said most of what I wanted to say in terms of thinking about looking ahead in this industry and the things that we have to consider. It's most relevant to what we have to consider as independent producers and production companies, and less what's going to be happening on the mid to high end of the market, and also for in-house production, because that's going to be handled differently internally, and most companies will have their legal departments, and they'll figure out how that's all going to work. But they already have things in place for when people get sick and those types of things. So that's the deal. Yeah, open forum always, just so you know, Shiz. I mean, the thing about the weekly live streams that I do is you can always ask a question. It's a little tougher with Camera and Flask because we kind of come up with a topic, and by the time the three of us and we, get through some things that we're tasked with, and then also the chat that's going on, it's hard to have as much of an ongoing dialogue about a particular subject matter. That we can do a little bit easier on this one. So, well, Clay, I was talking about finding potential gigs for newbies like Shiz, and that really got into right now identifying the types of productions that people are going to be looking for. And if you gain the technical knowledge and you have some of the craft-based knowledge to provide live streaming virtual event services to your clients or to potential clients in your area, then that is an area that I think there is opportunity for, because you're coming in not necessarily having to say you have 5 or 10 years experience. Speaking of Wild West, it is the Wild West when it comes to that particular subject matter. And I think that there's opportunity because you don't necessarily, you have to prove yourself at the job. And obviously, once you get 1 or 2 under your belt, you want to refer people to that. But it's so new for so many people, unless you're Alex Lindsay or somebody who's been doing it for years, to produce virtual events and live streams for people, on location stuff and educational stuff, that really, yes, having some video production background and being able to show some of your work would help, but you're coming in from a different vantage point. You're coming in essentially to the client as a consultant. And the consultant part of it may be also doing the production side of it for them. But a lot of people are just trying to figure out how they can get up and running and actually do this. So I think you have opportunity there. And I think that's what I was trying to touch on, Clay, for Shiz when it comes to finding gigs. Because it's going to probably be a little bit easier to do it in that space than it is in traditional video production. And so many companies are eager to be able to reach out, and they know nothing about this area. And quite honestly, we were live streaming before Google Hangouts, and then we're using Lightstream. But if I compare what I know about this area and being able to help people in this area, whether it's consulting or consulting and production, I'm light years ahead, but still, in the beginning stages of knowledge related to all of this stuff. But I'm light years ahead of where I was 3 months ago, which means that I know a lot more than most people, but I still have so much more to learn, which is why I try to be a part of office hours so much, when I can. So there we go. And we've got, OBS can be daunting. I think OBS is also limiting right out of the quote-unquote box, but there are ways that you can extend its functionality. I was a little frustrated when I was adding text to this live stream on Sunday. We wanted to create like a tip jar where people could actually, see an address and stuff. So, there's a lot to talk about here, but that's also part of my future education in terms of stuff, because I'm starting to talk to people who are Windows and PC based, and they want solutions, and you can't just tell people to switch to the Mac just because there's a solution that you're using. So you have to understand that and realize that when we're helping other people that they're going to have different platforms, and that's part of the education. 9:59 a.m. We're wrapping up the last minute, and it has been nice and interactive. Chat's been good. I didn't know where this was going to go. I enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully there's value to people who watch this afterwards. And I apologize when you get to the end of this for talking about the Xt4 for a period of time. That's not in the actual title, but maybe I'll update the description and add that we have a little conversation about the Xt4 and suitable lenses. Thank you very much. I'm not going to tell you what I'm drinking tonight, Small Brown Fox, because A, I don't tell people until Cameron Flask, and B, I haven't decided. So thanks again, and in just a few hours, 5 hours from now exactly, we will be starting Cameron Flask with myself, Ben Barden, and Caleb Pike. And it is going to be a conversation related to your questions. So if you're here right now and you're coming this afternoon, make sure your questions are succinct. Make sure that they are addressed to me or Caleb or Ben. And I believe that Caleb's hosting, and we will try to get through as much as we can. There'll be less of the beginning part, and what we want to do is hopefully start with questions and just go for an hour. And Clay, thank you. And thank you everybody else for coming. I'm going to end this stream. This sucker is done. And hopefully see most of you later on at Cameron Flask.